Behind Buckingham Palace's centuries-old façade lies a place so secret, even seasoned royal staff speak of it in whispers, the royal vault. For generations, access has been granted only to reigning monarchs and a carefully chosen few. But when King Charles reportedly unlocked the vault for Catherine, excluding Queen Camilla entirely, whispers turned into gasps and the palace into a battlefield of suspicion. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The royal vault has always stood as a symbol of sovereign discretion, its entrance hidden, its contents shrouded in tradition, and its relevance whispered in fragmented rumors. Nestled beneath Windsor's oldest stone, it is said to house the most coveted relics of the monarchy: sealed letters, ancient royal pacts, and personal items belonging to generations of sovereigns. But it wasn't just about what was stored inside. It was about who was deemed worthy to enter. For decades, access has remained tightly controlled, given only to the ruling monarch and those designated as direct protectors of the crown's moral and historical integrity. Queen Elizabeth reportedly held the only key, and even her closest family members weren't permitted to access its contents without explicit authorization. And yet, it was Catherine, Princess of Wales, and future Queen Consort, who was quietly granted that privilege. Eyewitness accounts placed her at Windsor Castle in the early hours of a mist-covered morning, escorted by high-level security and accompanied by 2 discreet royal advisors. No announcement was made, no explanation offered. The silence only fed the intrigue. Hours later, royal aides were seen transporting thick leather-bound volumes and sealed containers into a separate wing of the castle. The gravity of the moment didn't go unnoticed by the press or the palace staff. It was more than a procedural access. It was symbolic. What shocked insiders further was not just Catherine's inclusion, but Camilla's absence. During the same hours Catherine was inside Windsor's fortified corridors. Camilla was reportedly at Clarence House, uninvited, uninformed, and increasingly suspicious. It was a break in protocol that had ramifications far beyond royal logistics. By omitting Camilla, the king had made a quiet but thunderous declaration about who he believed should shoulder the weight of the monarchy's inner legacy. Camilla, who had spent years climbing the royal ranks and enduring public scrutiny to reach her position, now stood on the outside of a door she never even knew was locked. Speculation rippled through royal watchers, former courtiers, and media analysts alike. Had King Charles made a quiet pivot in succession strategy? Was this a response to mounting public sentiment favoring Catherine's grace and composure over Camilla's more divisive past? Or had an old royal pact buried deep within the vault come into play, forcing Charles's hand toward a decision long in motion? But as the palace kept silent, one woman refused to Camilla's reaction would soon erupt beyond the velvet-draped walls. Sources claim that Camilla's fury wasn't hidden, it was volcanic. Described by insiders as a confrontation that shook the royal corridors, Camilla allegedly demanded answers about her exclusion. But instead of clarification, she was met with royal indifference and a chilling silence from Charles. In the hours following Catherine's mysterious visit to the vault, Camilla was said to have stormed into the king's private quarters with a fury that palace aides hadn't seen since the early days of their controversial union. The confrontation was not quiet, nor was it diplomatic. She reportedly flung open the doors, her voice echoing through the thick walls of Clarence House, demanding an explanation. "I am your queen," she was heard shouting, according to a staff member who has since been placed on extended leave. That singular cry, filled with both desperation and fury, pierced the very image of unity the monarchy had worked so hard to maintain. But Charles did not respond in kind. Instead, he listened in silence, unmoved, offering no justification, no reasoning, and most devastating of all, no assurance. Just hours later, an official event Camilla was scheduled to host was abruptly cancelled. No reason was given to the press, and no substitute appearance was arranged. Royal commentators were quick to notice the sudden silence from her office and the deafening quiet that followed. The narrative had shifted, and it was no longer subtle. Camilla, once seen as ascendant, was now being gradually repositioned without ceremony, without explanation. That word, repositioned, became a whisper among aides and secretaries, coded language for something far more brutal, sidelining. What hurt Camilla most, sources say, wasn't the exclusion itself, but the cold, calculated way it was executed. She wasn't warned, she wasn't considered, she wasn't even informed. The vault, symbolic of legacy and lineage, had opened for another woman, and that woman was not her. As Charles retreated further into silence, Camilla's inner circle began to fracture. Longtime supporters started stepping away. Advisors who once championed her influence began withdrawing from joint appearances, citing vague scheduling conflicts and health breaks. The message was subtle, yet mercilessly clear. The Queen was losing her grip. Within royal staff chambers, talk of an internal rebalancing surfaced. Some claimed it was Charles following through on his late mother's unspoken wishes. Others sug. Instead, a shift driven by public favour and the quiet reverence Catherine inspired across the Commonwealth. Either way, Camilla's exclusion was not an accident, it was a signal. And that signal was reverberating through every level of the royal establishment. And as Camilla's fury simmered into icy silence, Catherine's next steps ignited curiosity across the Commonwealth. Once granted access, Catherine didn't hesitate. Within 48 hours, she contacted royal archivists and summoned 2 former aides of the Queen. The questions she asked and the documents she unearthed sent waves through palace protocol. Those closest to her say she moved not with haste, but with precision. Every decision made after her entrance into the vault carried the unmistakable weight of purpose. There was no grand announcement, no press coverage, no curated photo opportunities. Instead, Catherine reached out to figures whose names had faded into royal obscurity, 2 trusted aides of Queen Elizabeth, both long since retired, suddenly seen re-entering palace grounds under discreet escort. What they carried with them wasn't just knowledge of procedure, but memory untouched, unfiltered accounts of decisions, letters, and instructions the public never saw. For Catherine, this wasn't about symbolism, it was about answers. In a private room sealed from public view, meetings began to take place between Catherine, royal historians, and those former aides. For hours, sometimes full days, she pored through archives most thought had been long sealed. Among the first recovered was a thread of personal correspondence from the late Queen Elizabeth, stored in a fireproof chest labelled Private Legacy. The letters were not political, but deeply personal. In them, Elizabeth expressed concerns about the monarchy's moral compass in the coming decades. She emphasized the need for a steward, not just a figurehead to protect. The institution's spirit. What shocked many within the palace was the recurring mention of Catherine, not in her title, but in her character. The Queen described her as the unshaken pillar when storms rise. Then came something even more unexpected. Within a locked drawer inside the archive chamber, Catherine unearthed a sealed diary belonging to Princess Diana. It had been removed from the public collection decades earlier under strict order. The moment that seal was broken, whispers began to spread. Though its contents have not been made public, those who've read it reportedly describe it as prophetic, with clear sentiments that aligned more with Catherine's vision for the crown than anyone else's. The implications were massive. Princess Diana's legacy was no longer a symbol Catherine carried by marriage, but something rooted in intent and recognition. The effect was immediate. Staff began referring to Catherine not as merely the Princess of Wales, but as her stewardess, a quiet acknowledgement of what she was becoming behind palace walls. No longer just the king's daughter-in-law, Catherine was assuming a role forged through knowledge, not ceremony, and in those quiet corridors where only echoes of history had lived, she began shaping the monarchy's future, not through speeches but through discovery. Yet even as Catherine combed the past for clarity, others in the palace feared what those old parchments might reveal. Inside an envelope marked for the eyes of the future, Catherine found a handwritten letter reportedly from Queen Elizabeth herself. In it, a powerful declaration, trust, legacy, and leadership, meant for Catherine alone. The letter would prove to be more than words, it was a roadmap. Sources close to the palace confirmed that the letter had been tucked away in the vault's most secure compartment, sealed with the late Queen's personal insignia, en touche. Since its placement. It was dated just months before Elizabeth's passing, composed during a period when she had grown increasingly reflective, aware that her time was nearing its end. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, precise, elegant, but weighted with gravity. In its opening lines, she referred to Catherine not by title but as a woman of unshaken values, one who had held dignity without demanding it, and preserved unity without seeking credit. The tone was not maternal, it was sovereign, and it carried instructions. Within its folds were not commands, but convictions. The Queen expressed a deeply personal worry, one rarely voiced publicly. She warned of external forces misaligned with tradition, forces that would seek to reshape the monarchy, not through vision, but convenience. The implication, though not named, was pointed. She feared that some within the inner circle, even close to the throne, might compromise the crown's essence for expedience or influence. And that fear led her to assign what she called the final guardianship of moral continuity to Catherine alone. It was not a legal document, it held no binding power, but its emotional and symbolic weight eclipsed any decree. She called Catherine the moral compass of the crown, a phrase that reportedly brought the princess to tears. The revelation devastated and empowered her in equal measure. Staff described Catherine in the days following as consumed by thought, taking long solitary walks across Windsor grounds and cancelling engagements without explanation. There was no celebration, only silence. Because Catherine understood the burden that came with such an inheritance, it was not a gift, but a calling, and one that now placed her at the centre of a quiet storm brewing within the monarchy. Rumours suggest Charles had read the letter well before Catherine did. And though he never spoke of it, those around him say it influenced many of his later choices, including the controversial vault access. He had been entrusted with the crown, but Elizabeth had entrusted Catherine with its conscience. That division of duty, though unspoken, had begun reshaping the palace's future from within. And for Catherine, the letter did not grant her control. It demanded responsibility. But with trust bestowed comes backlash, and what emerged next from within royal ranks would test loyalties beyond repair. The monarchy thrives on unity, or so it seems. Behind closed doors, a divide was quietly crystallizing. Senior royals, once neutral, began choosing sides, Catherine's modern grace or Camilla's seasoned influence. And this time, neutrality wasn't an option. The first to break the silence was Princess Anne. Known for her stoicism and loyalty to protocol, she made her position known not with grand gestures, but with a single phrase overheard by a senior aide: duty over ego. That sentence, subtle yet seismic, was interpreted as an endorsement of Catherine's restrained strength over Camilla's assertive bid for presence. Anne, respected and feared in equal measure within the royal circle, had always been a stabilizing force. But now, her quiet support for Catherine set a tone that others could no longer ignore. Not long after, Prince Edward made an equally bold move. A portrait of Camilla that had once hung in the East Gallery of his official residence was quietly removed. In its place, a vintage painting of Queen Elizabeth was reinstated, an unmistakable nod to legacy and a clear signal of where Edward's allegiance lay. The divide didn't stop there. Beatrice and Eugenie, often careful to stay out of intra-palace affairs, maintained a conspicuous silence. Their refusal to publicly support Camilla, despite previous cordial ties, was interpreted as a quiet withdrawal. That silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Camilla's inner circle scrambled to contain the narrative. Longtime friends issued carefully worded interviews, dismissing the vault incident as routine and praising Camilla's resilience and unwavering grace. But the damage was already done. The palace press office, once prompt in defending the Queen Consort's reputation, was now slower to respond, if it responded at all. Media outlets, usually cautious in their coverage of internal royal matters, began circling like hawks. Reporters noted Camilla's abrupt absence from several high-profile events she was previously expected to attend. Headlines shifted tone, no longer celebratory, now speculative. The questions became sharper. Where was Camilla? Why had Catherine suddenly become the monarchy's central figure of continuity? And why had King Charles, usually a man of steady words, remained so silent? Inside the palace, that silence turned into a pressure cooker. Senior aides urged Charles to make a clarifying statement to address the growing speculation, to calm the rift. But he resisted. Those closest to him say he believed that time, not words, would bring resolution. But that belief only deepened the unrest. With each day of inaction, alliances shifted further. The once unified image of the royal family had begun to fray. And though the public still saw the choreographed smiles and coordinated appearances, behind the scenes, loyalties were being recalibrated and positions redrawn. It was no longer about tradition versus change. It was about who the monarchy trusted to lead its next chapter with integrity. While the public only glimpsed polished smiles, behind palace walls, a final push for control was quietly beginning. Humiliated but not defeated, Camilla turned to her inner circle. A quiet gathering at Highgrove became the birthplace of a plan, one that would reassert her presence, reignite old alliances, and block Catherine's expanding influence before it became irreversible. Within days of her public silence, Camilla reactivated the network she had once relied on to stabilize her place in the royal family. The names were familiar former strategists from her pre-coronation days, communications advisors who understood optics better than policy, and seasoned operatives with deep roots in aristocratic circles. No official memos were sent, no meetings held in the palace. This wasn't strategy by committee, it was survival by instinct. Her goal was clear: reclaim ground without openly declaring war. To do that, she had to begin where her influence once flourished, among the forgotten corners of the monarchy. She quietly resumed appearances at overlooked patronages, re-establishing visibility in places Catherine hadn't yet touched. It wasn't about the audience, it was about the headlines. Then came the whispers. Leaked conversations hinted that Camilla was in talks with publishers, not about policy or charity, but about a memoir, one described not as a tell-all, but as a clarifying perspective on her journey into royal life. Though unconfirmed, the rumors were enough to send shivers through the palace corridors. A memoir, especially from someone still seated beside the throne, was unheard of. Even if it never saw daylight, the threat alone shifted the balance. Select charity boards, some of which owed their prominence to Camilla's early patronage, began issuing public tributes to her contributions. The timing was no coincidence. The narrative was being molded, one speech, one article, one headline at a time. But the most cunning element of her resurgence came in the form of whispers planted within the palace itself. Aides close to Camilla, operating with careful precision, began questioning Catherine's motivations. Were her moves truly born of legacy and duty, or were they part of a quiet ambition to eclipse not only Camilla but Charles himself in royal relevance? These questions were never asked directly. Instead, they bled into informal briefings, late-night drinks, and quiet chats in drawing rooms. Subtlety was Camilla's greatest weapon now, because open defiance would be fatal. High-ranking courtiers, many of whom had managed the monarchy through decades of turbulence, began to worry. Charles, still silent in public, was now receiving firm warnings in private. The palace could not withstand two competing centers of power, not without fracture. Camilla's retaliation was not loud, but it was lethal. And if left unchecked, it could destabilize not just the Windsor image, but the very institution Charles had promised to safeguard. Yet, for all her maneuvering, Camilla hadn't anticipated one thing: that Catherine would not play defense. But before Camilla's scheme could take root, Catherine made a decision that would shake even her closest allies. What Catherine uncovered wasn't just symbolic, it was historic. A royal pact, inked in 1936 and buried beneath decades of protocol, outlining an unbroken line of women entrusted with guardianship of the crown's moral assets. And Catherine, by legacy, was next. The document had not been misfiled or forgotten, it had been purposefully sealed. Tucked deep within the vault's private archives, behind locked ledgers and ceremonial records, sat a faded parchment signed in the final weeks of King George V's reign, and co-authored by Queen Mary herself. It was a pact not of power, but of principle, a charter establishing a covert lineage of royal women whose role was to serve not as figureheads, but as silent guardians of the monarchy's moral compass during its darkest hours. It was the monarchy's contingency, for when tradition alone was not enough to hold the crown's integrity intact. This pact had not been invoked often, but when it had, history pivoted. It was cited privately during the abdication crisis of Edward VIII, during the Blitz, and again in the uncertain years following Diana's death. The names etched into the parchment read like a roll call of dignity: Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, and surprisingly to some, even Princess Alice. And then, added in newer ink, a final name, Catherine. That addition, confirmed by palace insiders, was made in the twilight of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, months before her passing. It was not done lightly. According to 3 royal legal historians consulted in secret, Elizabeth had the authority to expand the pact's lineage, and in doing so, had quietly bestowed a sacred trust on Catherine that surpassed titles or public roles. This was not about succession, it was about stewardship. The implications were staggering. Catherine was not simply a popular princess, she was now tethered to a legacy of female resilience, charged with guiding the crown's conscience when circumstance demanded it. She was not a threat to Charles but a counterbalance, and more critically, a direct challenge to Camilla's legitimacy. While Camilla wore the crown, it was Catherine who now carried the weight of the monarchy's silent constitution. The revelation could not be buried. Once the existence of the pact surfaced among senior courtiers, the atmosphere inside the palace shifted. Traditionalists viewed it as a sacred revival. Progressives saw it as Catherine's quiet rise to unofficial influence. For those loyal to Camilla, it was an existential blow. The monarchy, it seemed, had installed a second axis of trust, one unannounced, unelected, but no less powerful. Catherine, ever composed, made no public remark. But those closest to her described a subtle change, firmer resolve, less hesitation. She was no longer just reacting to the waves within the monarchy. She had become their quiet current. But revelations alone don't forge dynasties, public perception does. And soon, the world would witness the shift with their own eyes. Catherine's next public appearance wasn't just elegant, it was emblematic. Donning a brooch last worn by Queen Mary, flanked by Princess Anne and Lady Louise, she walked with quiet authority. The message was unspoken but thunderous. The crown was watching, and it had chosen. The setting was a royal engagement, long planned, but now charged with new meaning. All eyes were on her, not just the cameras, not just the courtiers, but the nation. There was no speech, no press conference, no hint of spectacle. And yet, everything Catherine wore, everything she didn't say, spoke volumes. The brooch, a piece steeped in history, had not been seen publicly in decades. Its last appearance had been during Queen Mary's final formal outing, and since then, it had been preserved in the vaults, deemed too significant for casual display. Until now. And with that single gesture, Catherine signalled continuity, not of status, but of stewardship. She wasn't merely stepping forward, she was stepping into something sacred. But just as striking as her presence were the absences. Camilla was nowhere to be seen, nor were any of her usual allies. The seating chart had quietly shifted. Observers noticed it immediately. Formerly prominent figures now found themselves 2 rows back, overshadowed by those whose loyalty had gradually tilted toward Catherine. The cameras caught it, the tabloids dissected it, and the headlines were relentless. A queen in waiting, Windsor's true north, the brooch that broke the silence. Social media exploded. Younger generations who had long viewed the monarchy through a lens of cautious skepticism rallied behind Catherine's calm strength and measured grace. She wasn't fighting or power, she was answering a call. And that authenticity struck a nerve. Hashtags praising her leadership surged, while online sentiment for Camilla quietly waned. Even foreign dignitaries, who typically maintained diplomatic neutrality, began sending formal acknowledgements to Catherine's office rather than the Queen consorts. Subtle as it was, it marked a shift in perception from ceremonial to consequential. Inside the palace, the ripple effects were undeniable. Events Camilla had once presided over were either reassigned or postponed. Palace scheduling, always deliberate, now favoured Catherine's initiatives, whether through oversight or intent, no one could say. But to those watching closely, it was obvious. A new centre of gravity had formed, and the monarchy was beginning to orbit around it, not because of decree, but because of belief. And yet, as Catherine's image rose like a tide overtaking centuries of tradition, not everyone celebrated. Behind the applause and curated headlines, whispers still travelled the stone halls of the monarchy. Allies of the old guard were regrouping. There were still hands gripping the edges of power, unwilling to let go. But Catherine wasn't chasing a crown, she was answering history. But even as Catherine's star rose, one last twist loomed in the shadows, one that would cement this royal chapter in history. After weeks of silence, King Charles addressed the nation in a rare televised message. Though brief, every word carried weight. He acknowledged the past, embraced the future, and, most importantly, confirmed the quiet transfer of trust that had shaken the monarchy's core. There was no fanfare, no ceremonial backdrop, just the king seated beside a table bearing one unmistakable symbol, the closed vault document. He looked tired, reflective, and yet resolved. His voice, measured and low, cut through the silence of the country as Millie Ons tuned in. What followed wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. Charles began by speaking of the burden of tradition and the ever-evolving demands of leadership, but it wasn't until he named Catherine directly that the magnitude of the moment was truly felt. He commended her poise, duty, and foresight, words that were not casually chosen. It was not just praise, it was recognition. He spoke of her role not as merely ceremonial, but consequential, a guiding force aligned with the deepest values of the crown. In a moment many didn't expect, Charles turned toward history. He referenced the unbroken legacy of women who had upheld the monarchy's moral anchor, invoking his mother, his grandmother, and unnamed predecessors who had stood not in front of the throne but beside it, steadying it in times of turmoil. And then came the line that silenced every room across the Commonwealth. It is in this lineage that Catherine now walks. With that one sentence, the speculation ended. The transfer of moral authority had not only been real, it was now royal record, and yet it was his mention of Camilla that drew the sharpest breath. He thanked her for her continued service, offering no elaboration, no titles, no direct acknowledgement of the role she had once defended so fiercely. It was a careful phrasing, neither diminishing nor exalting, but in its neutrality it revealed more than any condemnation ever could. Camilla, it seemed, had been quietly moved to the margins of royal influence. Not exiled, not erased, but repositioned. The throne still bore her name, but the legacy no longer clung to her hands. Public reaction was swift and split. For some, it was closure, a long-awaited acknowledgement of the future taking shape under Catherine's quiet command. For others, it was betrayal, a painful reminder that the monarchy, even at its most poised, was capable of turning inward with company. LD efficiency. Streets outside Windsor and Buckingham bore signs of both jubilation and protest. The monarchy had spoken, but unity had not yet followed. Catherine herself remained silent. She issued no statement, made no comment, gave no interview. Instead, she let the silence speak for her, sealing her assent with the same grace that had carried her through the storm. In that quiet there was power, and in that power, a message timeless, steady, undeniable. And so, with a vault unlocked and loyalties laid bare, the monarchy took a turn history will never forget. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.